All right, good morning and welcome to Making the State Records Center Work for You. My name is Ashley Salima. I'm the State Archivist and Public Records Administrator, and I'm joined today by Rachel Strashnik and Richard Height, who are both the dynamic duo that work for the Public Records Administration and help manage all of the requests that come in for the State Records Center. I'd like to thank you for joining us, and I know it's strange to say I'm excited to talk about records management, but this is a topic that hopefully is going to give you the tips and tricks to improve your workflow and find ways to just make your day-to-day work of records management tremendously easier. You'll be hearing from Rich at the very beginning. He's going to be sharing a run-through of records management reminders, things that are going to help in your everyday work. And then at the second half of the presentation, Rachel is going to be sharing about common requests and scenarios and solutions to potential hiccups and mishaps that we see when storing or requesting records from the State Records Center. Before we get into that, I do just want to tell you a little bit about us here. So first and foremost, the Public Records Administration oversees records management functions within the state of Rhode Island, but we also help local government. So we do both state and local. Part of that is the records retention schedules, which hopefully you're all familiar with. But if not, please feel free to take a look at the presentation we did last year about demystifying records retention schedules. It's a tool we will likely mention today, and you can always get a deeper dive another time if you're interested. We also set guidelines and requirements. We publish guidance documents. We have about 10 available on the website as of now, but we're always growing those resources. So we're here to support and answer questions and help you be successful. The last thing that we do, other than the records management standards and the offsite storage, is we actually also do work on historic preservation and assistance. So those historic records that you have in your offices can and should come here once they're no longer needed for day-to-day work. So don't forget us when you get to looking at those records, and do reach out. So by the end of today's presentation, you'll be familiar with the why and how of using the State Records Center, or SRC, as we often call it, and how to use it to your best benefit. So ultimately, good records management depends on everyone, and this webinar is going to provide the advice and the do's and don'ts to get you started. We are always aiming to provide a better workflow and to help you streamline the work you do, because we understand that we all have very complex jobs, and records management is a part of that, whether or not we are all trained in records management. So that's why we're here with these trainings going forward. You're welcome to pop questions into the chat throughout the presentation, or we can get in touch later on with more question and answers as well. So at this time, I'm going to hand you off to Rich, who's going to jump right in.
Hello, my name is Rich Height, and I'm State Records Coordinator here at the Rhode Island State Archives and Public Records Administration. I'm certain there are any number of people on this call this morning that I've been exchanging email messages with now for many years. But to start my portion of this today, I'm going to be talking about what is a public record. Now, as the slide notes, the crucial determining factors are function and contents. The questions to ask are listed. Do the contents concern public business? And does it serve a public function? Another way to phrase this is, was it created or received in the course of performing public business or documenting public business? And of course, what office is it from? Does the office perform public business? If you answered yes to the first two questions, and if your office is a state agency, then you, as an employee of that agency, create public records. Now, it is worth pointing out here that designating a record as a public record does not automatically mean that it is available for public inspection. Some are, but there are others that compromise the privacy of the individuals most directly involved if they are made available. There are some, such as the records of births, marriages, and deaths, that are not available to the general public immediately, but will be in the future. In the case of births and marriages, they'll be available after 100 years, and death records are available after 50 years. Now, it is also important to determine what are the most essential records that your office receives and creates. So, what is an essential record? Essential records are those that are most significant for the creating or receiving agency to continue performing its most basic functions and to document that which is most important to document. 5 basic criteria for defining records as essential are listed here. And I should point out, as it notes on the upper right, usually only about 5% of records are considered essential or vital. And I don't want to confuse the term vital records here with vital records such as births, marriages, and deaths. Essential is really the critical term here. And only 3 to 5% of records that any agency creates have permanent value. So, essential records, 1, they are records that are necessary for emergency response. They are records that ensure state government can offer the needed assistance to its citizens in the event of a disaster and also continue operating. Secondly, they're necessary to resume or continue operations. These records protect the health, safety, property, and rights of the people. And while the previous criterion references the needs of the public in unusual circumstances, such as hurricanes or floods, these can also, but this one is also just referring to the necessity of protecting the public in the same way that agencies normally do on a day-to-day basis, and ensuring that there are no interruptions in this. Okay, if records are necessary to continue operations, these are records that are necessary to in order to perform basic missions, and they protect the health, safety, property, and rights of the people, as noted on the slide. Records that would require massive resources to reconstruct. This typically refers to records that are not readily duplicated elsewhere and cannot easily be reconstructed. Some records are duplicated across numerous agencies. This is more of a reference to records that are unique to the agency in question. Finally, records that document the history of communities and families. Records that do this are the ones with the greatest historical value and can therefore be considered essential. Okay, as a member of an agency, you're responsible for creating records that fully document all legally mandated activities. Any agency and anyone who works in an agency is responsible for creating records that are thorough enough to document all legally mandated activities and to demonstrate these same agencies are fulfilling their obligations. All staff members must know what records they have and how to treat them. All policies, decisions, and transactions of agencies must be recorded, and the resulting records must be organized efficiently for current and future accessibility. Each agency is, as the slide notes, responsible for designating a records officer, and anyone who handles records should know who that person is. For particularly complex agencies that have multiple divisions, it may be preferable to designate a records officer for each division. For example, the Department of Administration, I can't imagine, any one person being able to be the records manager for that entire department. And the same is also true for the Department of Health, because that is also a very complex agency with multiple divisions. Agency responsibilities. Records generated by agencies document public business and therefore are public records, even if they are not open to public inspection. Agencies must maintain, secure, and care for all records created and received in the course of conducting their business. In addition to being properly organized and stored, they must be readily accessible to staff who utilize them, and they must also be easy to produce. Records retention schedules designate which records can be disposed of and when, and agencies should follow that. Even with schedules in place, destruction of records must be approved by the Public Records Administration before it can be carried out. And no record that is not designated on a schedule, whether it's agency specific or one of the general schedules, can be destroyed under any circumstances, regardless of how obsolete it seems to be. It's considered permanent until it is scheduled. Okay, to refresh on records management. Good records management has all kinds of positive outcomes for agencies, and they are summed up on this slide. Preservation of agency knowledge, for instance. And how often do agency staff find themselves thinking, oh wow, retired colleague Jane Doe knew that like the back of her hand, but they can't find the information needed on the specific question because Jane Doe is not around anymore. Effective records management prevents these situations. The core mission of agencies and the performance thereof must be documented in the records, not just in certain staff members' heads. These records should be easy to retrieve and to dispose of when the time comes. Timely records disposition, facilitated by a schedule, prevents agencies from facing unnecessary legal liability because approved certificates of records destruction serve as legal substitutes for records that are destroyed according to the schedules. Regulatory compliance is ensured and important information is safeguarded. Costs are cut and time and effort are saved. I'm sure all of us hear gripes from acquaintances about inefficiency in government. But this notion will never go away, but internally we can know when things are efficient. And records management plays a huge role in that. The generation and growth of records is also controlled this way. There's no need to create unnecessary records. Okay, now you're seeing examples of poor records management here, and nothing gives credence to complaints of government inefficiency like poor records management. The photos on this slide are enough to make any records manager cringe, and I know I have seen such situations. But all kinds of negatives can arise from poor records management, with the most damaging being an inability to perform the core mission. Agencies must be prepared to resume operations after disasters, whether it's caused by adverse weather, by people, and a failure to manage records properly will hinder that. This can lead to legal penalties for an inability to find and or produce records that are needed to facilitate public functions. And this can happen not only after disasters, but also in the course of day-to-day operations. Public trust in government lapses as a result of being able to produce requested records, particularly if the records and events they document are controversial in some way. Agencies can be accused of trying to hide something. And then finally, there can be costs involved in restoring records that are damaged before the end of their retention period. And in looking at some of the photographs in this slide, particularly that top one, I'm sure you can imagine the cost that could come about as a result of trying to restore records in that kind of a condition. Okay, in this section, we're going to be talking about just a few different items. When do you send records off-site? For example, there are several services that state agencies request of the Records Center. and to request those, agencies communicate with us, the Public Records Administration. Before requesting these records, these services, the following questions should be considered. I already mentioned, when do you send records off-site? What is the best way to store and organize records? And then how do you identify records for off-site storage? We'll be addressing all of those in this section of the presentation. Okay, this slide illustrates the life cycle of a record from the time it's created or received until the time it is permanently disposed of, whether by being permanently preserved or by destruction when it reaches the end of the retention period. The phase of this process that is highlighted here is off-site storage per a retention schedule. It is necessary for records to be scheduled before they can go into the records center. Agencies that do not have approved agency-specific schedules can only store records that are on the general records retention schedules. And in the case of quasi-state agencies, the records have to be covered by the quasi-specific schedules for fiscal and personnel records. Records should only go to the records center once they've reached their inactive phase. Now, records can also be stored on site within your offices in appropriate areas that are safe for them. For more advice on this, there are guidance documents and resources with recommendations on our website. Okay, to identify inactive records, you should ask the following questions. Is a record needed for day-to-day business? If the answer to that question is yes, then it's still active and should not be sent off-site. Okay, will it have to be frequently retrieved? If the answer to that question is yes, then again, it should not be sent off-site. The cost of frequent retrieval is significant. Okay, is it eligible to be scanned and a copy sent to me? It is if a notice of intent to digitize, otherwise known as an NID, has been approved. In those cases, once a paper record has been digitized, it can be destroyed after completing a certificate of records destruction and having it approved. If that is done, the paper record does not need to be sent into storage. Now, it's also possible to digitize records and send the paper versions into storage so that the digitized version becomes the internal copy. But the paper version can only be destroyed prior to the end of the retention period if an approved notice of intent to digitize is in place. And the standards for that are available on our website. Okay, does the retention period exceed 10 years? If the answer to that is yes, and the record is no longer active, off-site storage is a reasonable option. The standards for digitizing records and disposing of the paper versions are much more stringent for records with retentions of 10 years or more. In the case of records retention, the records that don't reach 10 years, there may be room to retain them in your office until the end of the retention period. I'm sure that varies significantly. But for permanent records, destruction of the paper is not an option at all, unless the paper versions are microfilmed at the same time as they are digitized. Do I want assistance managing my inventory? If so, our manual for state agencies offers that. We also offer advice on the process of sending records into storage, and all of the forms are sent to us for review first, and we send them back with any edits needed. We can also provide an agency's inventory of records currently stored at the Records Center within 2 days of receiving the request for that, and often it will be quicker. Okay, this slide has some diagrams, and it also sums up some do's and don'ts of storing records for the records center. These same instructions should also apply to records stored in your own facility. In terms of the do's, first of all, pack like with like. No two records from different series should be stored in the same box. We would not accept a transmittal for boxes that had multiple series stored in them. The sample series noted on the slide from the general schedules is GRS 9.2, which is unsuccessful job applications. They should not be stored with any records, other records such as COBRA records or any records from other series. As the slide notes, different years of the same series should not be mixed together in the same box either. This is not as serious a problem as mixing different series, but it will result in records having to be kept longer than necessary. For example, as shown on the slide, if unsuccessful job applications from 2016 and 2017 are filed together, the box will have to be kept until the newer records are eligible for destruction. The second thing that should be done is that boxes and folders should be labeled according to the records retention schedules, with the folders identified by the name of the individual file. Labeling boxes with the series number and name is helpful and that allows agency staff to know what it is internally. Now, boxes will be barcoded before they go into off-site storage, but having the boxes identified helps to ensure the correct barcode goes on the correct box when preparing the process, and it also makes the process of creating transmittals easier. In terms of folders, they should be identified by the file name within the boxes, whether it's the name of an individual, a business entity, or some kind of a file number. They should also be arranged in appropriate order, whether it's alphabetical or numerical, to facilitate easy retrieval of specific files when they're needed. And then finally, standard size record storage boxes should also be used. They're the easiest to handle and they avoid extra storage costs that are incurred by oddly shaped boxes. Now then, let's look at the do nots. Do not store unidentified files. No unidentified files should ever be sent in. They must be identified with a specific series from an approved record retention schedule, whether it's a general schedule or agency specific. Secondly, larger banker boxes and other oddly shaped boxes should not be used. They are awkward to handle and will create record storage issues at the record center. Finally, neither boxes nor folders should be overfilled. Either will cause damage to the records, and it's actually best to leave a bit of extra space in boxes in case other files need to be interfiled there. In terms of organization of records, the information about each box, folder, and record should be consistent. All of the items on the slide should be applied to records, and they should be extracted from the schedules. The record's title must be worded just as it is in the schedule, along with the sub-series if there is one. On transmittals, all words should be appropriately truncated, and we have a list of approved truncations on our website. When agencies are broken up into divisions and the divisions are identified within the schedules, that's included. Some agencies have offices in multiple towns, and in those cases, the town is noted. Our truncations list has 4-letter truncations for the name of each town. The date of creation of records is necessary to determine when it's eligible for destruction, and each record should have an item number or some other meaningful identifier like the name of the associated individual. Finally, a destruction date, again if applicable, must be noted. And remember, digital files and physical files should use the same file naming structure. Format is irrelevant to naming, just as it is for the retention period. In terms of organizing records, The picture on this slide illustrates an example of a properly labeled box using best practices. Each file has the record series, subseries title on this page, and the date of creation, and the record or item number or name. Iron Mountain does not require all of this. The most important thing to have on the tab of each folder is the identifier of the file, whether it's a case number, license number, or client name, or even a date. Whatever it is, Record Center staff will need to retrieve specific files when you request them. It doesn't hurt to put the other information on the file somewhere, though, because internally it helps other staff get the file back to the correct box while you still have it on site. For boxes, looking at best practice, the box is labeled with the record series and subseries title, date of creation, agency division, town office, date of eligibility for destruction. Or if it's permanent, that's noted. Again, the Record Center does not require all this because they locate and refile them by the barcode, not by anything written or pasted on the box. But all of this is helpful for staff to know where to file and refile items while boxes are still on site. Some agencies destroy records when their retention period is up without ever sending them into storage, after having the certificates approved, of course. In those cases, having the destruction dates on the boxes is hugely beneficial. The chart in this picture shows the process by which agencies send records into storage. First of all, agencies identify, organize, and pack records. The next step is that agency staff complete transmittal forms. After that, they send them to the Public Records Administration, which is us, for review. We then review them, inform the sender of any needed changes, and then the back and forth communication will continue until a final version is completed, assigned a number, and sent back to the agency. From there, agency staff inform us when the boxes are ready for pickup. We upload the transmittal form, schedule a pickup of the records, and let the agency know what day to expect them to Iron Mountain to pick the boxes up. Now, it's worth noting that since January of last year, it has no longer been necessary for agencies to give printed copies of transmittals to the driver who picks up the boxes. We download the information from the transmittal forms directly into Iron Mountain's database. And as long as there are no errors in barcodes or other types of data, such as a from date being more recent than a to date in the dates field, or a field exceeding the maximum number of characters, the process is then complete. Transmittal forms and resources, the items at the top of this page on the left are the transmittal form and cover sheet, both of which we will email to you upon request. The items on the right are on our website. The first one is the list of approved truncations of various terms used in transmittals. And the second one is a step-by-step video for preparing a transmittal. We will happily send you the links to both of these upon request. Our email address is on this site. Okay, I am now going to turn things over to my colleague, Rachel Strashnick, who will carry on from here.
Thank you, Rich. So now we're going to be going through what the process really looks like for making those state record center requests and why that's going to be specific to each request type and what's required, and why using these requirements actually streamlines the process for our team so that we have the correct information, which then makes it so that there's less back and forth between us and your agency so that we can get to what you need right away. So let's start with new box pickups. So when you need boxes to go into storage for the first time, as Rich was mentioning, you'll fill out those transmittal forms. And once they're approved, and once the boxes have been labeled and then placed in a specific designated pickup location that's away from other boxes that are stored on site, You can then email our team at the email you see on the screen with the following required information. Make sure that you're putting in the subject line the transmittal number that we have given the transmittal file name so that we know exactly which transmittal you're looking to use for the boxes going into storage, as well as including the number of boxes in that subject line. Within the body of the email, make sure to include your account number so they're associated with the correct account. Confirm the total number of boxes that you've placed in the subject line, and then also include a pickup address if it's different from what's listed in that contact address that's listed in the cover sheet. Finally, any additional information that you think would be relevant for us to know, make sure to put that there. Of course, attach the transmittal form and cover sheet that matches that transmittal number so that we can verify the boxes are the correct boxes that were uploaded into the database. Now, if you have any additional questions, you can always go to the Rhode Island State Agency Manual, like Rich mentioned, which is available on our website. And in section 1.7, you'll find all the information you need about transmittals and sending boxes into the State Record Center for the first time. So for all other State Record Center requests, you'll still want to send us an email, and you'll want to include the following required information for every type of request. So in the subject line, putting in what the order type is, for instance, if it's a retrieval, a refile, whatnot, as well as a summary of what the request is. So if you've got 2 boxes that you want to retrieve, you'll put in the subject line retrieval, 2 boxes. It's as easy as that. In the body of the text, put in your account number so we can make sure we're billing the correct account, as well as a contact name, phone, and address if it's not already in the signature. If you are looking to have this delivered to one of your other offices throughout the state, make sure to include that information just in case we don't yet have that delivery contact address in the system yet. Please also note if it's a rush order, both in the subject line and the body of the email, and then all required information for the specific order type, which we'll be going through in the next few slides. Now, this is a lot of information to throw at you, so remember, it's all in the State Agency Manual, and that's in section 1.8 for all other requests. So first, a retrieval. What is it? Most of you know, but real quickly, we'll go through. Basically, if you have a box or a file that has already been stored at the State Record Center and you want it to be retrieved from the State Record Center and delivered to your agency, that's a retrieval. The additional required information that we need for retrievals for boxes is just the SKP box number, nothing else. For files, we need that SKP box number as well as that file name or number that's on the tab of the file. Now, that can be found within your inventory that we send out annually in May for what those SKP box numbers are. And remember, you can always ask for an up-to-date inventory at any time throughout the year if you think that you need a new copy. Now, the one thing to note here is that if you are requesting individual files, there is a max amount of characters that can be put in for our request when we're submitting to Iron Mountain, and that's 60 characters. That includes spaces, commas, dashes, anything. So make sure that you're keeping those file names less than 60 characters to enable us to be able to order the correct file on your behalf. Lastly, the one requirement that Iron Mountain does have is that we list things last name and then first name. So please, when submitting requests to our team, do put it in that order. The one other thing that can be very helpful to expedite your request is to make sure that if you have a long list of files, to just paste them in as plain text into that email and not as a table. For instance, you can put, as you see here with the example for John Smith, you put the SKP box number, colon, the name. That's a lot easier for our team to be able then to copy that information into the database so that we can quickly retrieve your files for you. So the next common request type is a refile. And so that is when a box or file that's already been retrieved needs to go back to the State Record Center. So the additional required information we need for refiles is just the total number of boxes. If it's for just boxes, as you can see in the example, 4 boxes for refile, that's all we need. If it's for individual files, all we need is that total number of files. Now, if your agency is putting those files in a box for transport, it's really helpful for not only our team, but for the delivery drivers to be able to know how many boxes they're looking for. So for instance, if you have 25 files and they don't all fit in one box, and you split them up into 3 boxes for transport, telling us that there are 25 files for refile, specifically in 3 boxes for transport, will make sure that the driver picks up the correct boxes. Now, if you do this, if you put files into a box for transport, please make sure that you're removing all labels that are on that box. This will prevent any mistakes from happening so that the delivery drivers do not think that these are new boxes for storage at the State Record Center, and also make sure to just write somewhere very legibly on the box, refiles for transport. That way there's no confusion whatsoever. Interfiles, very similar to refiles, except an interfile is when you want to send a brand new file to the State Record Center. This is when you're adding a file to a box that has already been accepted into the State Record Center. This is also why that our team suggests when you're packing boxes to leave an inch or 2 of space when you're packing that box to allow for interfiles to be filed. Now, the additional required information is just the total number of files that need to be interfiled. But before you request the interfiles, please make sure that you are adding, as you can see on the screen, that blue label for interfiles onto each individual file, where you'll write the customer ID, which will be the same every single time, B8069. That identifies it as the state of Rhode Island. And then the file name that you have given, so what you write on that tab that goes onto the file itself, as well as the carton number, which is just another name for the SKP box number. This will make sure that your file goes into the correct box once it gets to Iron Mountain. Once again, just like refiles, if you're putting them into boxes for transport, make sure to remove all of those old labels and write interfiles for transport to remove any confusion for the drivers. So another request type would be supplies, when you need to pack up your files into boxes, things like the record boxes themselves, new box labels, like I just mentioned, interfile labels, etc. There's lots of different supplies that are available, more than just what you see on this screen. For instance, other common box sizes, as well as, file transport bags, things of that nature. So when you send that request into our team, make sure that you're adding the additional required information, including the quantity as well as the type of supply, both in that subject line and confirming it within the body of the text of your email. Remember, the only required labels are the new box pickups and interfiles. And that's really critical to remember to make sure that your boxes are going into storage correctly. Always review the state agency manual if you have any questions about this. Like I said, it's in section 1.8. It also lists out what other supplies are available for order. So one request that isn't as common but does take place is a permanent withdrawal. So when your agency no longer wants either a box or a file to be stored at the State Record Center but wants to keep it on site, that's when you'll submit this type of request. This is most common for frequently used files that it's not worth it to retrieve them consistently, but they also still haven't met their destruction eligibility. So if you're looking to specifically permanently withdraw a file, that can only be previously withdrawn or previously retrieved. That's when it can be permanently withdrawn. So if you haven't retrieved that file ever, it cannot actually be permanently withdrawn. You can just remove the file from the box yourself. But if it has a specific label on the file, it does need to be permanently withdrawn. And that's because every file that has been retrieved will be given an RFID label, and that's to keep track of it in the database. And so we want to make sure that we keep the database up to date with the most accurate information. So the information that we need additionally that is required for these permanent withdrawals for entire boxes is just the SKP box number, and for the files, it's that box number and file name and information that you gave originally when you retrieved the file. Now, if the box or file is not already on site, It will first be retrieved and delivered to your agency and then marked as permanently withdrawn. And this can be reversible if for any reason in the future you realize that you actually do want this box or file stored offsite again. But please know, we do not advise this. We advise against this because if there is the potential that it needs to go back into storage, it can cause some inaccuracies within the database, and we want to make sure that we keep high data integrity standards to make sure we can maintain intellectual control over the records that are stored at the State Record Center. So make sure that if you are looking to permanently withdraw something, you are positive that it's not going to need to go back into storage. So now we're going to talk a little bit about destruction requests, which can only occur once records have met their destruction eligibility based on their associated records retention schedule. There is something to note here. There are actually two different types of destruction requests, which may be a new concept to some of you. And so I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but all this information can be found on our website as well, is in the manual. You can always check section 1.9 in that manual for additional information, as well as within our additional resources on our website. We have some past webinars and other resources that go through the destruction process in detail. So specifically, the first type is just called destruction, and it's the process of destroying records that are stored off-site, specifically at the State Record Center. So when records are stored off-site, when you send the email to us to request their destruction, please make sure to also include the number of boxes you're wishing to destroy with those specific SKP box numbers, as well as confirming that those boxes are stored off-site. You'll attach the approved and countersigned CRD listing what those boxes are with, this usually occurs during annual destruction, but with that attached spreadsheet that includes all those SKP box numbers. Once we receive that information, we'll be able to submit the order for destroying them off-site. Now, say that you have boxes that are not off-site. You've retrieved them, they're on-site. That's when it's going to be a shredding request. And so shredding means the same thing. They're still going to be destroyed. But the shredding request is when you have boxes or files stored on-site that you want to destroy. So when you have a shredding request, make sure the additional information that you send us is the total number of boxes to be destroyed, as well as confirming that they are indeed on site with your agency and attaching the approved and countersigned CRD. Now, the biggest thing to remember for shred requests is that the difference between destroying and shredding is you need to make sure as an agency that you are removing every single box label that is on there to make sure that when delivery drivers come to pick up those boxes for shredding, they're not mistaken as refiles or new boxes into storage. So now we're going to go through some common scenarios and what solutions you can use to prevent them, and also what solutions you can use if they do still occur. This is really to prevent the unexpected, but if something happens, here's how you can be resolved quickly and efficiently. So first, we're going to be going through what happens when our team reaches out to say, there are some boxes in the database with missing data or that have no data at all. Some of the reasons this could happen is because there's typos in the transmittal. The most common typo is going to be in that SKP box number. So make sure to double check that transmittal for typos, because if even one digit is wrong, it's not going to go into the database correctly when the boxes are picked up. Another potential reason could be that files for refile or interfile were placed in a box for transport, and that box had barcodes or labels on it. And so when the Iron Mountain drivers pick it up, they think the box is for refile, not for specifically the files inside. And so that's also why you want to make sure, remove those barcodes or labels if the box is not a new box or an entire box for refile. Another reason could be that the box itself wasn't meant for pickup. always make sure that when you're placing boxes for new box pickup, to move them away into a designated location that's separate from any boxes that you store on site. Now, we know that a lot of agencies don't have the most room to store boxes. And so if that's the case, make sure whoever either sits closest to the records or in the same room knows exactly which boxes are which, so that when the driver comes to pick them up, there is someone there who can tell the driver exactly what boxes they are that they need to be picking up, so there's no confusion. The most common situation that we see is that a file cannot be found, and there are quite a few reasons for this. So we're going to go through them one by one. The first reason is that when the boxes are being packed, for some reason, the file was placed in the box incorrectly, whether it's upside down, backwards, not in the right order, whatever it may be. That's why we really stress to organize your files using best practices so that when files need to be retrieved later on, they can be. Another potential reason is that the file is in a whole different box. This is also why we stress to keep and refer to an up-to-date inventory. Like I said before, while we do send them annually in May, you can request a new inventory list at any time during the year. And we highly recommend you do this if you are an agency who frequently submits records into the State Records Center. The other thing that your agency can do in this case is when you do have that inventory, make a note when boxes and files are retrieved and refile. That way your agency knows exactly where the boxes are. Another potential reason is that the file was previously retrieved. The way to prevent that is always double check before requesting a file that you or coworkers don't already have that file. If you have more than one person in your office requesting files, this is very common. And so make sure to do that double check before sending in the request. Another potential reason it can't be found is that the box was refiled before the file was. So the way that looks is if your agency retrieves a box, and you and your coworkers are working with the files in the box, someone pulls out a file, someone else refiles that box and didn't realize the coworker next to you had pulled a file. Well, now that file is, going to be considered lost, if you will. So make sure that you are putting back all of the files before you are refiling the box. If for some reason this does occur though, and the box is refiled before that file can go back in the box, that individual file now needs to be interfiled to go back into the correct box if you don't want to have to retrieve the box again. Another common scenario is that the file was refiled by the agency and not by Iron Mountain, also considered lost. What that looks like is that a file is retrieved individually. Later on, the box is retrieved. And then the agency puts the file that was retrieved individually back in the box. But because Iron Mountain places an RFID label on that file, in the database, it says that file has been checked out. So unless the file goes back separately as a refile, it will not be scanned individually. And in the database, it will be considered still checked out, hence lost. So to prevent that, make sure that if you check things out separately, to also refile them separately. That's not to say that it can't be part of the same order. Just let us know that you have both a file and a box that needs to be refiled. Another reason could be that a partial file was retrieved, but the rest of it wasn't. For instance, say that there are 4 different file folders for Sally Smith. Well, if that's the case, when you request files, make sure you're telling us that you're expecting 4 files. That way we can let Iron Mountain know so that they're not just finding the first file, pulling that, not realizing there are additional files in there. Finally, the last reasons files cannot be found is when files are placed in a box for transport for either refiles or interfiles, something that I've spoken about before. This is one of the most common reasons that we see files being considered lost. And this is also one of the hardest scenarios to recover files. So make sure that when you are refiling or interfiling, you are removing those old labels. For instance, as you can see on the screen, we've got a box on the left. It's an old box, it's torn at the bottom. We don't really want to use it to store files, but it would be a perfect box to be able to send files for refile or interfile back to Iron Mountain to keep them safe. If that's the case, as it says on the screen, remove that label and then also write somewhere very legibly files for refile or files for interfile so that it removes all confusion. All right, so another scenario that might happen is that a file might be sent back to your agency after you've tried to refile or interfile it. There's kind of two scenarios here that might happen. So one could be that there's no room in the box for the file to be interfiled. Once again, that's why we really stress leaving a couple inches of space to allow for interfiles. But if that does happen, you can always request the box to be retrieved so that your agency can then redistribute the files into either 2 or more boxes, whatever makes sense for those files. Now, the other reason could be that the box the file was supposed to be going into was either previously retrieved, it was previously withdrawn, or it was destroyed or shredded. That is why you need to keep an up-to-date inventory and making sure to note retrievals, refiles, but also noting when boxes are permanently withdrawn, when they're destroyed, or when they're shredded. This can also help to use an internal inventory to reflect any new box or file locations if things are permanently withdrawn so that you know exactly where your boxes and files are at all times. All right, so the last scenario is that a box was supposed to be shredded and all of a sudden you're seeing it on your inventory. The reason why this might happen is that there were barcodes or labels on the box that caused Iron Mountain to either refile the box as a whole box because that barcode was previously used, or they will enter the box as a new box into storage because the label has never been used. This is why you need to make sure that if you are shredding boxes because they are stored on site and you want to destroy them, you remove all barcodes and labels from that box. Always refer to your inventory to ensure that boxes that are in offsite storage are supposed to be in offsite storage. Make sure that when we do send your inventory in May of every year, to review that inventory annually to make sure everything is staying up to date. It's also good to check in periodically throughout the year to make sure that your inventory is correct. All right. So the biggest things to take away from today is that knowing what a public record will help your agency identify what to store and where. Make sure to keep an up-to-date inventory of all records on and off site and to update it throughout the year for internal use whenever something changes. Make sure to organize your records based on records retention schedules and records series for easy discovery and access. Always make sure to include the required information for all State Record Center requests to make sure that your requests can be filled correctly and in a timely manner the first time around. Always review your inventory throughout the year and double check to ensure your records are where they are supposed to be. Your agency is responsible for knowing where your records are at all times. And finally, always communicate within your agency with those people who are also using the same records. A lot of times we find agencies have multiple people requesting records, which is great. But at the same time, you need to make sure you are in communication with those people because you might have a coworker requesting a record that you have. So make sure to always keep in contact with the other people within your agency who are requesting records. And remember, you can always reach out to our team with any questions and always refer to the online resources that we've spoken about today, such as the State Agency Manual, records retention schedules, transmittal forms and instructions. We also have all of our past webinar recordings online, as well as additional guidance documents on a variety of records management topics. All right, now I'm going to pass it off to Ashley. If we have any questions, please let us know in the chat.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Rich. So I'm going to wrap us up for the morning, but I do want to make sure first that I thank you for spending an hour of your morning with us to quite genuinely, help us help you. These services are here and we've set these protocols so that it is as straightforward as possible to get the best use from this system and from this storage. As we've gone through this presentation this morning, if I could drill home anything other than the takeaways that Rachel shared this morning, it is that the barcode for those boxes is going to be the essential tool as you're going through and thinking about your inventory and making requests. And we understand it can be a little confusing that sometimes it's called a barcode, sometimes it's a carton number, and sometimes it's an SKP. All three of those mean that associated barcode for that box. So keep that information in your back pocket, and it's really going to help you with any type of request that you're going to make with our team so that we can make it as efficient for you as we work with Iron Mountain on all of our behalf. So again, thank you for joining us today. If you'd like to contact our team, our information is here on the slide, and you can do so by reaching out via email or via phone. We're always here. If we happen to miss the call, we always give a call back, so don't hesitate. And we really do look forward to working with you in the future and continuing to help you have the best time in storing records, not having a frustrating time. So I'm going to close this out. If you have any questions, none appeared in the chat throughout the morning, but once I stop this recording, we'll hang on for just a couple of minutes in case anyone does have any lingering questions. So again, thank you very much for joining us.